Hello and welcome to the Friday Five. It is September 30th. I'm excited to chat more about our Friday Five. So every Friday, I talk about a Montessori toy, a non Montessori toy, a practical life idea, a book to read, and a parenting question that I find on the internet this week. And part of the Friday Five is that it's interactive. So if you have a question, please pop it in the chat and we can discuss what's going on in your household, how some of these ideas might show up in your household with your child. But let's get forward to the Friday Five. I'm Mariana Bissonnette, your host and the creator of the Montessori Masterclass, which for today only is 90% off. So please head to thepeaceprogram.org/masterclass and you can get in for 90% off, which is an incredible deal for so much content, interactive groups, tons of bonuses. So I hope you check it out. So our Friday Five today, we're going to do our Montessori toy and our non-Montessori toy back to back so that we can kind of compare and contrast what we mean by a Montessori toy. So every week I like to explain that when we think about a Montessori toy, we're going to think about it from the perspective of development. That's what Montessori education is all about. It centers the child's development, and then we prepare spaces and we prepare ourselves to support the development that the child is trying to do. This is how we reach the child's potential, is that we make sure that we are aligned in our actions and in our environments to the child's development so they can live up to that developmental potential. The non-Montessori toy is going to be something that where either in the making of the toy, development's not really centered, it's just sort of whatever it is. And we can either draw a line into how this could be used developmentally, or we can kind of consider the Montessori alternative to that toy as what it would look like to actually infuse and center the child's development into the things that the child is going to use, whether we call them toys or materials or activities. That's what we're going to kind of think about. I always like to add an aside that there is a Montessori curriculum, especially for older ages. It's not 100%, the same at every single training center, but there's like a basic idea. So there's certain things that are going to be really considered Montessori materials as part of the Montessori curriculum. And I'm not talking about that. I'm talking very broadly. What are the things that have centered development in the creation of this material, or how can we use development to present this activity to the child? That's what I'm really seeing. So not necessarily a standardized Montessori curriculum, which is much more applicable after 3. There are some pretty standard materials under 3, but there's also a ton of flexibility in creating a developmentally aligned space with the developmentally aligned materials. And after 3, the sort of Montessori primary and elementary and even adolescent, like there are really specific aspects to those programs that you would expect out of a Montessori school or experience. So let's take a look. So our Montessori toy versus non-Montessori toy is we're going to look at the box with the tray and ball. Sometimes this is called an object permanence box. And then we're going to compare that with just a ball. So should the child have access to both? Should the child just have access to a ball? Is there a benefit for them having access to a ball with a box? What's going on between these two things? So the box with the tray and ball, I said sometimes it's called an object permanence box. And object permanence is a sort of cognitive milestone that infants usually reach somewhere between 8 and 10 months. So before 8 or 10 months, the child does not have an impression that things are permanent. So for example, if something goes sort of hidden to a 3-month-old, like they're laying on their back, they're holding a rattle, and then they drop the rattle, they can't see the rattle. It basically is not in their cognitive awareness that that rattle ever existed. So you wouldn't see a 3-month-old go looking for that rattle unless they could visibly see it. So it's really important for a 3-month-old. This is why in Montessori we dangle Montessori toys, or we create mobiles for them so that if they drop a toy, it's still in their visual field and they'll reach out and get it. But they're not going to go look at, because they don't have this thing called object permanence. So this is also a big reason why around 8 to 10 months you start seeing, well, one of the reasons why you start seeing separation anxiety as a developmental milestone is the child becomes acutely aware that you are around somewhere even if they can't see you. So that awareness is because they've developed object permanence. They know that even if they can't perceive you, that you're still here. So you start seeing the child look for things that are hidden. They love peekaboo at this age, between 8 and 10 months, and they will play either on their own, or if you put a little covering your face, they will want to pull it down, or if you did that to them, they'll want to pull it down. It's because of object permanence that they're engaging in that way. So having activities where the design of the activity is that something goes missing and then reappears is going to be very interesting to the young child, which is why this box with a tray and ball, or the object permanence box, this was designed as part of the sort of Montessori curriculum, because it's really going to provide the child with a tremendous amount of developmental interest. So I will say that one of the differences here is that the Montessori, the box with the tray and ball, it is not there to teach the child object permanence. The child's going to figure out object permanence on their own. They might already know it at 8 months. So this is not, you don't introduce this to a 4-month-old and say, well, I'm going to get ahead of object permanence. That's not what the goal of this object permanence box is. The goal is to say that the child developing object permanence is probably going to be really interested in things that go hidden. They really like peekaboo. They're really interested in this concept. And so they want to play with the concept. And so activities like this can be very interesting to the child, and they're going to want to do them again and again and again, because it's so interesting to their mind of the idea that something goes hidden and then shows up. One sort of design detail of these boxes, if you were to make this yourself, a great way to do this is with like a shoebox, is that you can imagine if you turn a shoebox upside down, now the bottom is a tray, and then you take or the lid is now at the bottom, which is functions as a tray. And then the top part, if you cut that in half and then add a sort of side piece and a hole at the top, you can imagine that you can create something that looks fairly similar to this. One design detail is that the base of what's inside the box is at a very slight angle. So that tiny elevation means that as the ball goes into the hole, it's going to roll down and roll out. So this is really helpful for a child who's just starting to become aware that things that are hidden are still there. They are getting practice with this idea without the ball actually getting stuck in the box. There are later activities of object permanence where the object does actually get stuck in the box and it doesn't come out naturally. And that would be for an older child, that would probably sustain their interest a little bit more. So one example would be, it's a box with a drawer. And so you push a ball, usually it's sort of like a fabric kind of ball or a beanbag ball. You push that through the hole and then you open the drawer and you see the thing there. So that's sort of the developmental intention of the object permanence box, is meant to align to the child's natural development of object permanence. And it will therefore usually be very interesting to a child at this age. And they will focus and repeat these kinds of things, not for the purpose of learning object permanence, but for the purpose of holding their concentration and allowing them to coordinate their movements to try to do this over and over again. So that's going to be the point of any of the toys in the Montessori environment. They're not there to teach the child anything. They're there as tools that are meant to inspire complex movement, because the more complex the child's able to move their own body, the more they're able to say, I want to pick up that ball. Pick up the ball and I'm going to put it in the hole. And they actually put it in the hole. The more they do that, the better their hand is. The more their hand is, the better they are with manipulating other tools like their utensils or a toothbrush or a pencil and paper. So that is the objective of the child's development, is to develop complex movement. And when the child has materials, toys, activities that truly align to their developmental interests, they're so much more likely to use them and repeat them, and therefore develop even more complex movements. So that's the Montessori toy. And then let's think about, okay, but what if I just got a ball? what's the same or difference with just a ball and not actually having the object permanence part? So one thing about a ball is that for a child who is not crawling yet, so think of a child who's not crawling, if we put a ball in their space and they try to reach for it, and instead of reaching for it, they actually like push it away, what is the ball going to do? It's just going to roll away. And if they're not crawling, they can't really do anything about it. So now the toy's gone. And so even if they can see it, even if they have object permanence and it rolled sort of behind the couch and they know that it's there, they really can't do anything about it. So either they're going to call for help and they're going to get you involved and then you bring their ball back, or they just sort of abandon the work with the ball. So we don't see focus or repetition in that. Whereas with a crawling child, a ball can be really fun. And often kids will end up playing something that looks like fetch with themselves. They'll sort of toss the ball out and then they'll go crawling after it. And then they'll get the ball and they'll toss the ball out and then they'll go after it. And that's really exciting for them because it's inspiring their movements. It's giving them a reason to crawl over there and play this really fun game. Whereas if they can't get over there, there's no, either they're calling out for help or they just abandoned the work with that toy. So that's, they're not like getting inspired to do complex movement. So this one would be really much more age dependent. This object permanence box has a lip around it, so the ball goes in. Obviously, a child could not put the ball in the box and then the ball would roll away. We'd have the same issue. But there is the tray. So if they are putting the ball in the hole, then the ball isn't going rolling everywhere, because this can be introduced for a child who's sitting. And that can be very interesting to them to just start to play around with that. It's not to say that balls are not in the environment. It's just that they're most applicable when the child is mobile, because then they're the ones in charge of the activity in the toy. They're the ones that are following their own interests. They're coordinating their movements. All of that is this own self-directed energy. And it's not the adult that has to get in the middle of the child's play. Because if the adult gets in the middle of the child's play, then the child ends up having an orientation that in order to play, I need to go through the adult. And sometimes we end up seeing that manifesting in toddlerhood, where the child will then, they'll come to you when they're bored so that you connect them with something else, as opposed to having the child feel empowered to connect directly with the toy. So we should be mindful of how much, when the child connects with us because they're bored or they can't figure something out or they don't know how to solve the problem, about how we can then not just solve the problem for them or connect them to the next toy. It's more of empowering them to connect so that they don't develop that association of, oh, when I'm bored or need something, I should go through you. Because you're going to see a whole lot less independent play, just because of the child's orientation of, I come to you first and then you connect me with the things, as opposed to the child connecting directly. So that's a little bit about some ideas around just having a ball versus having an activity with a ball. Either one of these are very DIY. So obviously you can get a ball. It's helpful if you store it in something like a basket rather than a shelf. or some kind of container that would have other kind of balls in it. Otherwise, it's just going to keep rolling around everywhere. And it would be helpful if that container didn't also have a bunch of other things. So one of the things we talk about in Montessori is categorization. So the child's brain is building the architecture of itself in the first 3 years. It's really building the way that information is stored. Think of it like a file system. So imagine you've just walked into, a corporate basement, and all the corporate files and everything is there, and there's rows and rows of file cabinets. If when you opened a file cabinet door, there were just papers everywhere and they weren't organized, it'd be super hard to find that information. So whoever designed the file system designed it in a way that makes it really inefficient to access information. So that's the same thing with a child. They're building the architecture of their brain, particularly in the first 3 years. And if they aren't developing clear categories, then the brain is going to have a lot harder time pulling out memories, pulling out information, pulling out experiences, because it's convoluted. It's like an actual network of trying to get to the piece of information. So one of the best ways to help the child build a strong architecture in their brain is through external order. So if we think about a bin with balls inside, and then there's also dinosaurs and a weird sand thing, and there was a jump rope, and I don't know, just any kind of random thing, we just put it in a bin. That's basically like saying the child's file system is a bunch of papers in the drawer. Whereas if you say, I'm going to have a basket with just balls inside, and then there's going to be a shelf, and the shelf is going to have musical instruments on top, and then it's going to have puzzles on the bottom, or it's going to be the bottom of a bookcase, and those are going to be my kids' shelves. If we do that, then the brain is going to start using external order, the order of their environment, to build these categories that, oh, there must be something connected between that ball and this ball and this ball and this ball. And I know that they're always in this basket and I can always find them there. So then the brain is going to say, okay, I don't know what the difference or the same is between any of these things in the environment, but these ones are getting lumped together. And so they start creating something that, like, ooh, I notice all of these are spherical. I wonder if that's the element that is pulling these things together. And slowly, as the child's architecture is being built, it's starting to pull together that things that are spherical are kind of being pulled together. And maybe it's things that are spherical and lightweight, right? Because if they pick up an apple and they're like, I never see an apple in the ball basket, right? It's kind of spherical, but it's heavy. So what's the difference? The child's brain is paying attention to all of these and creating an amazing network all at the same time. So balls are super applicable, especially with mobility. Once the child is crawling, and the way that you store them, it's really helpful if they're categorized, usually in a basket next to the child's shelf, maybe 3 or 4 balls. Often people pick sensory balls because you can get a whole pack. But it doesn't really matter. The idea is that they do tend to, once they're mobile, like to go after things that crawl away, that sort of roll away from them. Whereas before they're mobile, they can't really do much with them. Whereas the object permanence box, they can actually start using after they're sitting, and they can start exploring with some of the ideas around something going missing and then actually still existing. So we're going to move on with our Friday 5. We've done our Montessori toy, our non-Montessori toy, and now we're going to get into a practical life idea. So 3 of 5. And this week we're talking about toothbrushing. So this is a really popular topic with parents, and it's one that I really enjoy talking about. And in order to think about toothbrushing, if you have a child under 6, I want us to think about the long trajectory of toothbrushing, and then I want us to back up and sort of see where your child is. And if you're watching and you have a comment, you want to let me know how old your child is, we can talk about toothbrushing, put it in the comments, and I'll pop it up on the screen. But so we want to look at the long view, and then we're going to go narrow to what our child is at, our child's age, and kind of what their potential struggles are with this task. So the first thing that I would do in the long view is sort of say, imagine a 6-year-old. Is that a child who can brush their teeth? Right? Most people would say, yeah, that sounds about right. even if you don't work with kids or you haven't worked with that age group, you can imagine a 6-year-old is like, yeah, I think they could probably brush their teeth. Well, the other thing developmentally that's happening around 6 is the child is getting their permanent teeth. So that's another thing that's helpful for you to know is that around 6, that's when their baby teeth swap out to their permanent teeth. And once the child has baby teeth, what you'll notice is that typically baby teeth are coming in with a tremendous gap in between each of the teeth because they're so small. But when the permanent teeth come in, that's when there's very little gap between two teeth. The permanent teeth are much bigger. And because of the difference between the baby teeth with a gap and the permanent teeth with hardly no gap, is it becomes really, really important to take care of the permanent teeth because there's much more likely of a chance of getting food stuck in between the bigger teeth that are so close together, and they are the permanent teeth. So these are the teeth they're going to have for hopefully the rest of their lives. So that's 6. That's where we're kind of at 6. Let's back up a couple years. Let's think about the child at 3. So if you're not that familiar with a 3-year-old, usually what's happening in the first 3 years of development is the child is building every part of themselves. So they're building a language. They don't know where they're born. Wherever they're born, they're going to speak the language of the people around them. So in the first 3 years, they're building the language. They're born with no coordinated movement. But then by the time they're 3, they're like running and jumping and walking. So the child in the first 3 years is in a state of construction, of development. They're just sort of building the basics of what they are doing. And then 3 to 6-year-olds is usually a time when what Montessori called refinement, where they're just kind of like polishing off. So in the example of language, the child is building a language. They don't know where they're born at 3. They don't know what language they're supposed to speak. And then by 3, they're speaking in sentences of that language. And that is now their own mother tongue. So that's what's happening in the first 3 years. Well, where does language go in the next 3 years? Well, in the next 3 years, they start picking up on nuance of language. They start understanding different aspects of language, like what happens if I just don't say the truth? What happens with words that are basically the same definition but slightly different? They're really focused on, they start understanding jokes. They start getting into the nitty gritty that by the time they're 6, we now say, okay, this is a child I can really converse with. I can talk to this kid and we can have a real conversation. 3-year-old definitely can talk to them. They're definitely being able to hold a conversation, but not robustly. So 3 to 6 is all about that refinement. So that's the big vantage point. So what's happening with toothbrushing is we say, okay, so the big goal is that by 6, by the time the permanent teeth are coming in, the child is capable, and we perceive that they're probably pretty capable of doing their own teeth. At 3, they're also pretty capable of doing their own teeth. They're probably not good at the real tiny details, but can they pick up a toothbrush and go like this in their mouth? Absolutely. A 3-year-old is capable of doing that. And so 3 to 6 is going to all be about, how do I teach you the nuances of getting to the very back of the molars? How do I teach you to floss? How do I get into we've already got the basics down, but now we're getting to the nitty-gritty. So with the first 3 years in toothbrushing, then we start saying, okay, well, this is a time of true development. This is a time when the child is really starting to build capacity. So we start saying, okay, well, what's happening in the first 3 years? Well, they don't have teeth for 6 months. Okay. So we don't really have to worry a whole lot about that. Then 6 to 18 months, they're getting a lot of their teeth. So these are very early teeth. They are, sometimes kids get their teeth all at once. Sometimes it's really slow to sort of come out, but somewhere between 6 and 18 months, they're going to get their teeth, some of their teeth. And then there's the 2-year-old molars where they're really polishing off the rest of the teeth that they're expected to have until they're 6. And then they have another sort of resurgence of their permanent teeth. So given that, 6 to 18 months is actually a really great time to be introducing toothbrushing. And we know that it's not hyper necessary because the teeth are far apart, that they, brush for 2 minutes and floss. That's all nuance. Right now, we're just trying to get the basics. And if the toothbrush is in my hand, then I am continuously learning the basics, and they aren't learning a whole lot. So we really want to make sure that the toothbrush gets to be in their hand and be okay with the little that they're doing from 6 to 18 months. They could just put the toothbrush in their mouth. They could swish it around a little bit. It's going to be very helpful to make toothbrushing routine. So if you aim to have the child brush their teeth twice a day, then build it into the routine while they're being introduced to the toothbrush so that they know to expect it. You don't have to brush for 2 minutes, right? This is not about the actual teeth being dirty and need cleaning. This is so much more about putting in the building blocks of the routine. So when you wake up in the morning, you do a little bit. Maybe you do a little, the child gets to do a little, and that's just the routine from 6 to 18 months. Somewhere after 1, you're probably going to see some moves to independence. So this is going to be a child who has started to build some capacity, and then they want to tell you that they would like to take responsibility of certain things. And they don't always have the best way of conveying that. Usually it's in the form of a tantrum, but they're going to resist you doing things for them. And what that means is what they're trying to shout off the rooftops is, I've got it. I need to learn how to take care of this. So when the child starts doing that and being really insistent on doing it, then that's a great time to think about, does my child have access? So am I in the middle of the child and their toothbrush? Or is there a possible way where they could have a step stool to the counter, or they could have some way of accessing their toothbrush? Is there a possible way where they could turn on the water themselves? Is there a possible way that they can take a sip from an open cup, swish their mouth and spit out? Is that possible that the child could have access to doing this experience themselves? Because they're not going to be very good at it at first, but the point is that the more they do it, the better at it they are. And what we're aiming for is by 3 that they have the building blocks. That's all. We're really just aiming that they have the building blocks of, I can pick up a toothbrush, put it in my mouth, and I get the basic sense that I brush. I go like this. That's what we want. We're going to deal with nuance in 3 to 6 because we still have tons of time to work out all the hygienic aspects of toothbrushing, because the teeth are still far apart. They don't have their permanent teeth yet. And as long as they're not going to bed with like sugar on their mouth, right? So if they had juice or if they had something, you definitely want to rinse their mouth out. But outside of that, the teeth are not getting a ton of food typically stuck in between them because the teeth have a natural gap. Development is trying to help the child lead a successful life. So we want their teeth, and development wants their teeth to grow and become what it should be. But that's what so as you place yourself on the timeline for your child, that's what I would be thinking about. Am I in the very early stages where they don't have teeth, so I don't have to worry about this? Are they in this mid stage, this year from 6 to 18 months, where we can put it in routine and just have the basic expectation that you do, I do, it's just sort of something that happens, and then be looking out for the child when the child really starts saying, I want to do it. And if they want to do it, think about access. So if you say, okay, you can do it, but I hold the cards on everything else, I have to hand you the toothbrush, I have to do everything for you, the child's not really learning that responsibility, and that's what they want. That's what they're advocating for. And then when they're in their 3 to 6, that's going to be a really important time to have the sort of finish passing the baton. So you're on a relay race as the adult, and you're trying to get yourself out of a job. So 3 to 6 is all about like, I'm going to let go now, but you can't just stand there. I'm expecting you to be able to take care of your teeth. And when we do that with respect, when we do that with the sort of larger developmental view in mind, we are going to get to the place where when the child's permanent teeth come in at 6, they actually are functionally capable of taking care of their teeth, and they do it well, and then they don't have to deal with things like cavities and other things that we don't want them to have to deal with. We want them to have strong teeth for life, and that's when the 6-year-old teeth are coming in. And incidentally, just in case you didn't know, the way that their baby teeth came in or comes in, depending on the age of your child, that's the way that they will lose their teeth. So if the child develops their first bottom incisors, which is very common, then those are going to be the first teeth to go when they're 6. So that's the way it goes. And then from 6 to 12 years, that's usually when the child is losing their baby teeth and getting their adult teeth with some gaps. Sometimes you have a big flurry of switching out the teeth, and then you don't have a lost tooth for sometimes a couple years, and then you start swapping out the other teeth, the molars and all that. So that's our practical life. Remember that you can drop any question into the chat. I will put it up on the screen, or I can just talk about it if you share the name of your child. Sorry, not the name, the age of your child, and any of these ideas that you're thinking about, or really anything about Montessori or parenting that you wanted to ask about. So our next up in our Friday 5. So Friday 5, we talk about one Montessori toy, one conventional toy. We talk about practical life, a book, and a parenting question. So we're now up for our book. This is a book that would be a read aloud book for children who are around kindergarten. It's called Song for a Whale. This is a phenomenal book. I loved this book. So if we think about read alouds for children, we can always read aloud a picture book. Those are really lovely books, and there's some really wonderful children's authors and illustrators, and we can always do them. But there is a point, usually somewhere around 4 or 5-ish, where children really benefit from what I think in sort of teaching communities we call chapter books. So it's just books that have a longer arc of the story where you're following along a longer period of time, and you're not going to read through the whole book in one sitting. So there's obviously going to be a lot more character development, and there's going to be sort of a much better sequencing and memory exercise for the child if you read a little bit of a chapter book every day. So somewhere around 4 or 5 is a great time to introduce read aloud chapter books. Some families really enjoy doing this at bedtime, that this can be a really nice down-regulated time of the day is to introduce a chapter book, and then they can they want to get through their checklist or whatever they need to do, because you're gonna snuggle together and you're gonna read the chapter book. And I would just really emphasize that this is in addition to picture books, and this is not one that we're expecting them to read. Of course, if you have a child who's 4, 5, or 6 that's starting to read, there are readers. There are books that are really centering phonetic sounds and really, really simple stories, a couple words per page. Those are called readers, and those ones are really, really helpful to an early reader. So this would be the read aloud version. And then what's nice about reading these aloud 4, 5, and 6 is these tend to be really great reading books in elementary school because the child has a sense of the story, but then they get to relive it themselves. So Song for a Whale is about a girl who is deaf, and she loves working on radios. And I believe she's probably about 8 or 10, somewhere in there. And she loves working on radios. She feels the vibrations. And in science, and she goes to a school that is not sort of centering children who are deaf. There is a deaf school in her community, but her parents really wanted to send her to this other school, which means that there's not a lot of peers who know sign. And so she has an aide who's able to translate, but there's sort of this interesting push and pull of, should she stay at the school where there's sort of a diverse array of kids who can who maybe know a little bit of sign, but some don't know sign, or should she go to a school where basically everybody knows sign? And she's in science class one day, and she finds out this is a real story, not the book, but the real story of the whale. And she finds out about a whale who sings at a frequency that none of the other whales can understand. And it's 55 hertz in real life, I believe. And most whales, I forget what their typical, what typical sort of sound vibration they sing at. But this poor whale that is a real whale, this is a real live whale, can't talk to anybody. And so nobody can understand him. And so she, of course, finds a lot of affinity with this whale. And she has an idea from science class. And with all the work that she does with radios, she has an idea of what if I made a recording of whale sounds and stuff, but I tweaked the recording to be down at 55 hertz. So what if I created something that was actually at 55 hertz, and then what would happen? Would the whale be able to what if I broadcast this and I actually gave it to the whale? So it's a story of her journey of developing this, contacting the whale institute that tracks this poor whale, and it's just a phenomenal story based in some reality, but obviously goes completely off the rails and has its own story, which is an amazing story. It's just such a great read aloud, and the author has done a really beautiful job of describing the characters and just elaborating on the story. So if you have a child 4, 5, or 6, or even elementary school, this is a fantastic read aloud. And if you haven't started doing read alouds, and you have a child who's 4 plus, a 4-year-old probably is not going to follow the story 100%, but they might get into the rhythm of a read aloud. And then certainly when they're 5, they're going to really start to follow the stories. So I hope you enjoy that. I hope you check it out. Really beautiful story. A Song for a Whale. Last up, it's our parenting question. And if you want to pop a parenting question into the chat, please feel free. So this parent's question was, how do you deal with tantrums and behavior of things that you don't want to see? So if the child is having a meltdown in a public place, so they said that they know that language is really important, but what do we do when the child is having a tantrum in a public place? Obviously, there's going to be some embarrassment for the adult in not only the child having a meltdown, but also in everyone's perception of your parenting. So it's helpful to know that if you're feeling extra sort of activated, it's possibly because of the onlookers, and we don't want to pass that issue that we're having onto our child in terms of how we deal with it. So as much as we can, there's some self-work here that we can do to just sort of say the onlookers and the onlookers, but my focus is the child. And that will usually help guide our way out of this situation the easiest. And sometimes that just requires some self-work. Sometimes it requires some self-care that, when I am cared for and I've taken some time for myself, I feel more regulated and proactive. And if my child has a meltdown, I can say, you know what, I feel okay. I'm going to handle this and, not worry too much about what other people think. So there's a little bit of the adult here that I would just sort of name, that we should deal with meltdowns in the same way, regardless of whether we're in a public space or not. But if you're feeling particularly activated in a certain area, then that's probably more work that you can do for yourself. Either, upping the self-care, upping the amount of time and support that you get, in addition to just general reflection around where you're kind of at with, feelings of what does it feel like to you to be embarrassed? What does it feel like to you to be watched, or, to be seen in that way? So, but what do we do about the child? So I wish that the person left their age. If you're ever asking a question to an early childhood educator, or to really anyone, always include the child's age, because the child's age is going to tell us a whole lot more about what we can expect developmentally from the child. So particularly if you're asking an early childhood educator, a Montessori guide, the age is super helpful because we can tell you a little bit more context about the child's age. I'm going to assume that I'm going to assume that this is a toddler, because developmentally, that's when a lot of tantrums are coming up. It's not to say that kids don't have tantrums later. Sometimes adults still have tantrums, right? But developmentally, it's coming up around toddlerhood. So I would first think or remember that when we think about the child as a toddler, they are developing and constructing a language. So they haven't really reached that yet, right? They might be getting to sentences by the time they're about 3. So they might have a couple words at 2. So they don't have their language completely built yet. And they're feeling a huge pull towards independence. So they want to start being in charge of themselves. And that's a developmental pull. That's a good pull. We want them to start to learn to be responsible and independent of the and taking care of themselves. But sometimes what happens is they're demanding independence, but they can't really articulate exactly what it is, and they melt down. Sometimes that's like language gap is a big reason for a meltdown. So I'd say that that's category 1. Another main reason why children are melting down is because of order. And it's helpful if your child is melting down to first try and say, my best guess is this is language or this is order. And I'm going to explain the order one, but it's helpful because it can really inform how we support the child through their big feelings. So order, the child is, we talked about the file system earlier. So because it's so important to have a well-functioning brain, to have things categorized and stored so that you can actually pull memories out later and information out later, it's so important. So the brain is highly focused on order, particularly during toddlerhood. And so sometimes kids will have a meltdown. We think that it doesn't make any sense and they're being stubborn, but sometimes they'll say, if I'm holding my child's hand, they're 2 years old, I'm walking through the parking lot and they're like, can I have water? And I go into my purse and I happen to have some water and I give them water and then they completely fall apart. Because they wanted a pink cup instead of the blue cup that I was trying to give them because I left the pink cup at home. Right? That's a really standard situation when a child who's 2 is going to melt down. That has to do with order. And the way that has to do with order, and you can see that they're hypersensitive to the way things are organized, is an indication that they have misfiled something. And that doesn't mean that they're right. They're wrong. They've misfiled something, but it does mean that we can kind of understand their tantrum a little bit. What I mean by misfiling is they filed quenching my thirst, meeting a need, getting water under pink cup. Pink cup has the special liquid that I need to quench my thirst. So I'm 2 and I have a need and the pink cup delivers that. You give me a blue cup, I have no idea. I have not filed that in the same location. I'm just like, I don't know what that has. That could have sand for all I know. And they get really frustrated because it's confusing and they feel like their need is not getting met. So we have to work with the child, give them a diverse array of experiences so that they will file vessels that look like water bottles, no matter what color they are, have water in them that will quench your thirst. That will come with time, but there is going to be some periods of time when the child melts down because you didn't give them what they wanted. And it's not about what they wanted. It's just because they didn't expect that. So if you said, do you want a banana? And then you didn't give them a banana, you actually cut it up into pieces and gave it to them on a plate. And then they threw it and they were like, I don't want banana. And you're like, seriously, you just asked for a banana. That is a problem of order, is that they had in their head that a banana looked like this. And when you handed them that, they were like, I don't know what to do with that because I thought you were going to give me a banana. It's all about that file system, the architecture of the brain, and it's misfiled. So we don't want to get mad at the child for misfiling something. We want to show them, let's move this over here, that the blue water bottle actually does have water. So that's going to be our orientation. I think that especially if your child is having a meltdown in public, first step, check yourself and see, is my experience of this going to influence the way I handle this situation with my child? Or can I do enough self-work that I can sort of say, yeah, all right, people are seeing whatever they're seeing, but I need to focus on what's going on. Is this a language barrier that the child was trying to communicate to something to me and I didn't hear it or didn't understand it? Or, do I think that that's the most likely reason? Or is this a really obvious issue with order, which means that they've misfiled something in their brain? It doesn't help anyone to get mad at them for that. It's really about like, I'm going to help you with your feelings, which usually means I'm going to be calm. And if we need to get in the car, even though you're melting down, I'm going to tell you calmly, it's time to be in the car. You can put yourself in, or I can put you in. They're melting down. And then you say, this is me helping your body. So you're into the car. I'm completely calm. Strap them up and go. So we want to be calm. We want to help move them to the next thing so that they feel like tantrums, they just come and then they pass. Or is this really about order and we have an opportunity to just sort of say, okay, here is an expansive learning moment where we can sort of say, all right, what's going on in your brain? You've misfiled something. So I think it's helpful when you approach an issue like tantrums or behavior to do self-work, to then decide, is this language or order, and make your decision of how you're going to support that. Because if it's language, it would make a ton of sense to give the child more language. If they were trying to communicate something and you missed it, to tell them, say, you sound upset, you're mad, or you sound, you really wanted that. And then if they get more upset, you got it wrong. So you're giving them more language. You're not catering to them. You're trying to pour language into them so that they can then clarify with you. And then they say something helpful and you say, oh, that was the problem. That doesn't mean you have to go get the toy or whatever that they wanted, but it does mean that you gave them the missing piece that they needed in order to tell you the thing that, the lack of ability of telling you, or your lack of understanding, was what caused this big meltdown. So when you pour language into them, they're going to be able to advocate for themselves. And then whether or not they get the toy, the problem was that they felt misunderstood. And if it's an order one, then that's an opportunity for us to they don't have to drink from the blue water bottle, but I can keep affirming there is water inside. And until they try it out, until they see for themselves, it's going to stay misfiled, but ultimately they're going to experience it and then say, oh, that was the same thing. The category doesn't have to be pink. It's actually this particular kind of vessel. And then they expand their category a little bit. So language is super important. And I think it's really helpful to try to differentiate what kind of tantrum we're dealing with, an order tantrum or a language tantrum. And if you were asking me about a 4-year-old throwing a tantrum, I would probably have similar advice, but also slightly different developmental information. So if you got a 4-year-old, let me know. But so that's the end of our Montessori Masterclass. That is the end of our Friday 5. And I hope you check out the Montessori Masterclass. Today only, it's 90% off. It's launch week. I'm really excited about this all-inclusive, engaging platform for you to be able to get the information that you need about your child, Montessori, parenting, from a team of international, multicultural, multilingual providers who are all Montessori trained, who are ready to work with you and your family one-to-one, self-study, in groups, and it's all in the Montessori Masterclass. So please check it out, and thanks for watching.